Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. I am Shane Mauss. I'm back doing my first podcast in like a month. To you guys listening, I banked episodes and stuff. You won't know this, but I haven't. I banked a bunch up. I've been traveling. I've been exploring what my future is going to look like in terms of touring and where I'm going to live and that sort of thing. I've had a break from the show, and I feel refreshed and excited. And I'm here with what's really fun about doing this podcast and finding a bunch of academics in so many different fields. I started the show, I was touring, and I just look up random people at universities and be like, hey, will you come on my podcast? Your work looks interesting. And what's cool about that is sometimes I've had a non-trivial number of people on this show that it's their very first podcast ever. And today is that case. Adam Willcox is joining me today. Thank you, Adam, for joining me. Welcome to your first podcast. We're doing it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Shane.
This is better. Listen, I sit in on a lot of like virtual conferences and stuff. I take a lot of like online classes and everything, and this is way easier. You don't need to have a PowerPoint presentation. You don't even need to be correct about things. We could just wing things. It's super fun. I love doing this show, and I love having casual conversations with scientists. Can you tell people a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. Well, currently I'm here at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I'm a research associate professor. I'm in the Department of Forestry, Wildlife, and Fisheries, and also in the Smith Center for International Sustainable Agriculture. And I do quite a bit of teaching, and some of it related to One Health, this concept of One Health of humans and the environment and animal health. But really, my passion is conservation. So I've been involved in conservation my entire career since I left school back at UVA. I've traveled the world to Cameroon and Tanzania, and just came to UT recently, about 8 years ago, and found a really good place where I could raise my family, share some of my experience with students that I've had from all my adventures abroad, and then continue some of my research as well. So I've got research projects in Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa still. So it's kind of a neat thing, academia, for me. I didn't really expect I was going to like it per se, because I spent so much time away from it, and I spent many, many years between all my degrees. But actually, it's a good fit. It's a good fit for me and a good fit for my family.
Well, that is fantastic. It actually goes perfectly into something. This is one of the first things that I wanted to ask you anyway, and you led right into it by talking about the adventures that you've been on. Because I know you've got to go abroad a bunch in your career and spend time with cultures, very, very different and a lot more diverse than a lot of us Americans are used to. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of, well, I was kind of wondering how you got into it, and I wanted to ask you, what moved what more? Was it like your passion for science, or was it like, oh, this would be a cool idea? Was it the adventure side of things, or was it a blend of both? Or
it was definitely the adventure side of things, I'd say, Shane. So I went to the University of Virginia undergrad, and I did degrees in environmental science and then English language and literature. Really weird mix. But I did have sort of a plan to my madness. I was going to go into environmental law. So I figured that was the way I could affect change and conservation policy and that sort of stuff. I'm from a very small town in rural Virginia. We still don't have a stoplight. I think population is like 500. It's a town called Scottsville, Virginia. And I went to school at University of Virginia, which was our big city. It's not a very big city at all, but it was right up the road. But as I was finishing up my undergrad, I was like, I'm not sure if I want to go and clerk and do the whole law understudy thing in DC and then go into law school. So I just by chance was walking back to my apartment one day and I saw an open session for the U.S. Peace Corps to learn information about becoming a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. And I dropped in and I was like, this sounds really cool. I had not really been out of the country aside from the Bahamas before then. And wanted to explore the world and didn't, figured to learn a little bit about what the Peace Corps is doing. I was like, well, I'll throw my hat in the ring there. I could take my LSAT book with me, I guess, and study overseas. And I got accepted in the Peace Corps. And I got on met a group of my peers in Washington, D.C. We got a bunch of shots and inoculations and flew across the pond to Cameroon, Central Africa. I brought my LSAT book with me. I never opened it up, never cracked the page. It said in the provincial capital. And then I did 2 years as an agroforestry extension agent. So what I was doing was working with rural farmers in lowland tropical rainforests of southwest Cameroon, working with them to plant soil improving leguminous tree species. Rainforest soil is not all that great, surprisingly, even though it's some of the most biodiverse places on the earth. A lot of the carbon and a lot of the nutrients are like up in the canopy rather than it being in the soil. So slash and burn agriculture, when you chop down the trees and then burn up the field so you can be able to plant, the soil leaches and depletes really, really fast. So farmers are on like a 2-3 year rotation for these fields. And we were, the U.S. Peace Corps had us working to plant different types of trees that fix nitrogen. So they suck nitrogen out of the air and they put it in these nodules in their roots, and you plant these trees in rows or alleys on different farms, and you plant crops in between them. And when the trees get big enough, you cut those trees and they grow back again. But as you cut them, those roots release these nitrogen nodules into the soil, and you can stay on the soil for, I don't know, a couple more years rather than that every 2-3 year rotation. But that's enough really to promote secondary forest regeneration, keep people in one spot, that sort of thing. And from there, man, go ahead.
So you get like twice as much out of it. Just with this one change creates, you can go from 2 to 3 years to 4 to 6.
Yeah, and you can. And then it is as well, you can use the poles and things for firewood. So the trees that you cut down, you can use the stalks for firewood, and they renew every year. So it helps farmers quite a bit. And I was paired up with a Cameroonian, the guy from the Ministry of Agriculture, and he and I kind of worked hand in hand. And I got really good and really interested in working with people, right? Mm-hmm. So I got into this thinking I was going to go into law, got interested more in working with people and loved tropical agriculture and tropical systems. And just serendipitously, Peace Corps put my post right next to a wildlife sanctuary. So I was living right next to the 𝕊𝕐𝕒 Wildlife Sanctuary, where the Wildlife Conservation Society had a project. Those guys were originally the Bronx Zoo, based out of New York, but they're a big global conservation organization now. And from there, got meeting those guys with WCS, was really interested in wildlife. They consume a lot of wild game in and around this sanctuary. That's all we had to eat. I was in a very, very remote area, a couple hundred people in my village, and the road was only passable during the dry season. The rainy season would come, the roads would get completely destroyed, and you had to kind of walk out or bike out to get there. So I was really stuck in this community, and just living like everyone else lives. So if someone shot a buffalo that week, that's what we ate. If it was in the dry season, the rivers were a bit low, and we're just catching local fish, or the fishers were catching local fish, that's what I'd eat. So we were totally dependent on wild game and wild products for my entire time there. And it was a big issue. The populations are growing, and you can't hunt all those big animals all the time, or the populations will go down. You will deplete them a bit. So got really interested in working on sustainable use of natural resources when I was with WCS. Then after my Peace Corps, I actually joined WCS. They hired me away from Peace Corps. I was going to do my third year, extend my Peace Corps service. But the director of the WCS project at the time was like, no, we work with you great. I'm just going to hire you on for a couple of years to work with us.
Interesting. And you're kind of, I always have like 5 things I want to talk about all at once. You have a bit of a specialty with kind of your knowledge of bushmeat and the bushmeat trade and its influence on local populations and the global impacts as well. And obviously with COVID, the global population has started hearing the word zoonosis quite a bit more than than in the past. And I know that's a aspect in consideration as well. Could you? So maybe before we get into that, let me think of the best structure to go about this. I think first let's set up what what the One Health initiative is. Since I like working with them, I try to have an episode every month with the University of Tennessee talking about the One Health initiative. If we can talk about that, and then from that, maybe let's get into a little bit of bushmeat stuff, and I would like to talk about food insecurity as well. And then I have personal questions about what that diet is like too. So let's start with One Health initiative.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'm one of the University of Tennessee One Health scholars, and I've been involved with the One Health program even before it existed. I think you had Deb, you may have had Nina or Deb on the program before, definitely Marcy. But Those guys we were part of the original UT Center for Wildlife Health. So I started with them, and then this grew into this One Health initiative. And what One Health is, it's really looking at health from more of a holistic perspective. So you've got human health as one component of One Health. Then you've got environmental health as another component of One Health. And then you've got animal health, and that includes livestock and wildlife as well. And all these things interact with one another, and that's how we keep ourselves healthy. And if we have something like a zoonosis or a global pandemic, we really need to look at it from those three different components to be able to solve these big issues, big wicked problems. So, for example, we can't all do all of that work. It's just a huge, massive work where not one type of scientist, no one could have that many specialties to be able to tackle an issue from a One Health approach. So what I bring to the table is actually now I'm a trained social scientist. So I work with communities and people to find out their attitudes towards different behaviors or towards behavior change, because that's sort of the way you get behind the scenes on how to change people's behavior or how to encourage more healthy or more pro-environmental behaviors. So
let me guess, you yell at them on Twitter. Is that the perfect way to change people's minds? Exactly. That's my method, and it's flawless. Oh, I've changed so many minds.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, when you do that, it really, really works. But yeah, no, actually, what I feel a lot of what I do is I give a voice to those people that are not shouting on Twitter. Okay, So the people that are shouting on Twitter are the extremists, usually. For better or worse, far left, far right, trying to politicize issues that are really not political. At the end of the day, most people are kind of middle of the road. So I try to give those kind of folks a voice. So it's a lot of doing surveys of people or interviews of folks to find out what they really think about a specific issue. And a lot of times, I learn so much from the people that I talk to or interview. There's traditional knowledge and local ideas that can really play a part in solving some of these bigger problems that scientists in their ivory towers or scientists in their labs would have never thought of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all right. Well, so and part of the thrust of One Health is, and part of why I'm involved is because a big part of it is public communication, just raising awareness, generally, because a lot of as we're all becoming more mindful. I remember I was watching, obviously this is just a TV show, but I'm sure it's somewhat representative of I remember watching Mad Men, and there was just this scene that stuck out of Draper's with his family in the park, and they're done with their picnic and they just stand up and leave. And like all of their picnic stuff is they just leave behind. And that's just what you do. Why would you throw things away? You just, and my dad lived in a small town of like a couple hundred people in Iowa, and kind of the middle of nowhere-ish, especially back then. And it was not unusual for people to pitch stuff in the river or whatever when you're done with it. Like, yeah, that makes for a good dump. And it's just kind of like a global mindfulness, a cultural mindfulness of like, oh, I've never thought of that. Oh, this recycling stuff, that's new. And it usually seems weird at first too, you know, some of these initiatives, and it takes time to get through to the general population. And then your side of things is like, well, rather than just kind of telling people what to do, rather than a scientist coming up with some great idea of what they think is going to work, actually going into the communities and talking with people about what's realistic and what makes sense and what solutions they already have.
It's funny you brought up that example. I remember this old Simpsons episode where they're driving on a road trip somewhere, and Lisa and Bart, and everyone's just throwing junk out the window. And that's kind of how it was when I was growing up in Scottsville as well. And you also get that example of the picnic, right? So that's what you're kind of describing there. Part of what's going into play is a norm. So it was the social norm, man. That's what you did when you were finished with your can of Pepsi. You threw it out the window. Everybody did it, right? I mean, that's just what you did. That family got up and left the picnic. That's just what you did. Yeah. But as we, as people started to learn how to influence people in their behavior, we started to like understand, hey, well, people probably don't really know that's a problem. So you can they probably have actually a pretty good attitude. They don't want to make their place a dump. So they probably actually have pretty decent attitudes about the places where they're at. But it's just the thing to do because, well, Dad did it and Grandpa did it and everybody did it and my friend did it. But we can study that stuff. So we can find out where people are on the attitude scale, and then we can find out which type of people are important to others, like village leaders or, community activists or my family or my friends. And we can really understand these norms and then target messages to the people that are important to others, people that are influential. And we change norms. We can change things relatively quickly. I always give the example in classes when I ever talk about the social psychology models I use. I'm an 80s kid, was born in the mid 70s. And, when it came to gay marriage, especially during the Bush and Clinton administrations, there was a no ask, no tell, all that stuff, right? So that was not that long ago. I'm not that old. When we had very negative attitudes about gay people, homosexuality, that it was running jokes, and it was common with me and my guy friends to, call people gay and stuff like that. It's not cool to do that. To do that, to be mean to anybody. We weren't, we were honestly just joking around. But
I was thinking about this very thing like yesterday. I'm from kind of like not rural, but a smallish Wisconsin city. And
it's nuts, man. It changed so fast, and and people's attitudes once they started, understanding other people and learning about gay culture and learning that what they were saying and doing was hurting others.
Yeah,
that change was fast, man. To go from the 90s to the 2000s, where we're approving gay marriage from in a 15, 20 year span, it's incredible. But it's just you can really, it just goes to the thing that you can change people relatively quickly when it comes to things like attitudes and things like norms, and you understand where to target your messages and things. But it's just people think, oh no, everyone's set in their ways, and there's these, it's either you're far right or far left or any of this stuff. But no, people are actually fairly malleable and fairly reasonable. I know it's an odd thing to say when we're in a political climate where folks are shouting at each other. But in general, people are fairly reasonable and not out to get one another. I think COVID has maybe deepened those divides, and I hope you enjoyed this on your road trip. We're back in person at UT with masks on and things in classrooms and being as safe as possible, I guess. But I understand the connection to students much better now, and I understand that my messages get across so much better when I'm able to talk and discuss with people in person. And you're not just hiding behind the internet, but people are much less likely to throw those knives or stab you in the back if they're sitting there looking at you. And you two can relate over something. I used to love just, before COVID, I was going to do this my whole life, just in a strange town, go up to a bar, order a beer, and strike up a conversation with the guy next to you. He could be completely from the other end of the spectrum, but you can talk and have a good time, and learn about each other. And I've got plenty of friends that have different ideas than me, so it's a thing to where this is kind of an interesting topic for me, because at the end of the day, yes, we have all these things we have to do with science to cure diseases, or science to solve conservation issues. But if people aren't willing to make changes, and we don't know how to, sort of push that needle a little bit to change people's minds, we can do all the science on an endangered species till we're blue in the face, but we can't talk to folks on how to conserve it, or understand folks on why and have them convince them on why they should conserve it. Then what's the point of doing this research? It's just going to go extinct unless you're going to talk to the people who can actually do something about it.
Yeah, I am thrilled that we're talking about this subject. It's super interesting to me, and it's very important. Every message is going to resonate a little. I think about some of like David Attenborough's more recent work has been like super heavy into the darker extinction side of things. I think a little bit of it's projecting as he's kind of going extinct himself. He's getting up there in age. I'm gonna miss that guy when he's gone.
Mm-hmm. We all are.
But anyway, I'm still thrilled with everything that he puts out there, and I kind of have a fondness for the darkness, and I like hearing about kind of tragic thing, and I'd just rather be aware of them than not be aware. It just doesn't bother me as like, I find it really interesting. But I know a lot of people that normally like the planet Earth and those sorts of things, watching the wildlife documentaries, that have found his recent series is to be too depressing for them to get through. And if that's the case for that person, well, good luck, helping some otter population if you don't first get people interested in otters enough to like learn more about it to care in the first place. And there's just the point of that explanation is just each individual is going to need to kind of hear the message slightly different from it depends who's delivering it and everything else. And then in terms of norms, one, I have my own biases because I'm sort of I can be a knee-jerk contrarian, and so I've always ran away from every norm that there is, so it's kind of easy for me to change for better. Some norms are good, and so it's like sometimes it's not great to hate every single norm that there is. But I've also been really privileged because kind of, as you were saying, getting to meet a lot of people and travel, and as a comedian, I've gotten to travel the world. I've gotten to meet endless audiences of every kind of rural and metropolitan, and just every kind of audience, VFW clubs to like hipster venues and everything in between. And you can't help, speaking of like, making homophobic remarks and stuff when you're a young man, and I had plenty of that and other out-group bias and stuff like that, and that stuff just naturally goes away when you travel and meet more people. There's nothing, you don't even have to try. It's not like virtue signaling or whatever. It's just like, no, I just met a bunch of people. You can't think of people as like different or dehumanized once you meet and chat with them. And so it's also a place of privilege too, that like you and I have gotten to travel so much and have so many experiences, because a lot of people just are in the same town that they've always been in, and like got a job and had a family, met their high school sweetheart, and have great lives, and nothing's wrong with that, but they just haven't had the opportunity to, like you and I have, to meet such, different culture, explore different cultures, and meet such a diverse number of groups of people.
Yeah, and that's, I know we're here to talk a lot about One Health and research, but that's a major part of my job here at University of Tennessee. Is I coordinate the study abroad program for the Herbert College of Agriculture, and I lead like 3 study abroad classes. So I lead one to Belize, and then one to Costa Rica. And yes, it is a little bit of a privilege because they are college students, but we actively try to recruit first gen and people that aren't typically on study abroad programs. But when I was in college in the 90s, study abroad was not that big of a thing, and it's taken off exponentially in recent years. And that's one of the things that I see now as my job purpose at University of Tennessee. Yes, I can teach about international agriculture and natural resources, so I'm blue in the face in the classroom. But I've taken students that have never left the state of Tennessee into the rainforests of Belize, and to see that through their eyes and to experience with the wonder and fascination through them it's just amazing. So getting people out into the world and experiencing other cultures, it can't be more important now than it's ever been, because we're, in addition, back in the 80s and 90s, we weren't connected up like this. We had no Facebook. We got our stuff from documentaries and TV shows about different cultures and whatnot. But now we got people connecting up online across the world. But the next step is definitely to get people out and experience it. Because you travel, man, there's nothing like going to eating a new food, meeting a new person, trying to stumble through your English versus someone else's English versus another local language. It's fun, man. It's a lot of experience, a lot of life experiences you learn doing these sorts of things. And, I try to give a little bit of that back to, give a little bit back to my Peace Corps experience, give a little bit back to my travels to the up and coming, hopefully new leaders of the country here at the university.
Yeah. This is such an interesting, and might I also say feels daunting as a topic in terms of changing norms. I mean, when you think about norms, that's huge. That's I mean, the word implies it. It's you're talking about changing massive aspects of a culture. In humans may very well be one of the most flexible, adaptive species on Earth, but darn, they can be stubborn as well. And I mean, I've lived through. How old are you? Do you mind me saying?
Yeah, 47.
Oh, you're 46. Oh, you look young. I'm 41.
Hey, thanks, man.
I've lived through, the seat belts.
Yep.
And that was, I mean, people were so averse. I mean, I still know people that don't like wearing their seatbelt, even with now my car's beeping at me because my buddy won't put his dumb seatbelt on. Like, come on, it's been 30 years. And then, smoking indoors is like, I sometimes still perform in clubs where they'll still have smoking indoors. I remember mentioning something on stage, be like, you guys have no idea how insane this is. And they're just looking at me like I'm the crazy one, because it's like you don't see until it's over. And I remember when they tried to end smoking and everyone's like, this is government tyranny and the overreach and they're trying to control us and blah, blah, blah. And then you stop having smoking indoors and everyone's like, oh yeah, we all prefer that. Even smokers, it's just better for everybody.
I grew up in rural Virginia, and you could buy, because Philip Morris is in Richmond, Virginia, you could buy cigarettes when I was back. They've changed, of course, they've changed a lot of sense, but you could buy cigarettes at age 15 in Virginia. So as soon as you got your learner's permit, you go start buying cigarettes. And I did that because that was sort of all my crazy buddies and their rebellious norms. Yeah. I remember the seatbelts too, but some of these campaigns have been great though. So the seatbelts, I remember doing this to my grandparents, and I'm of a similar age to you. And I remember getting stuff in school. Hey, you got to wear your seatbelt, all the safety stuff in school. And I get in the car and I've somehow convinced my parents and then convinced my grandparents. So they, them loving their grandchildren, of course, and it becoming the norm in young kids, we were able to move the needle a little bit on some of that with family members, of course, but that's not true for everyone. So understanding these norms and who's influential to people, you can know where to target your messages, and you can change. You can slowly get in there and change behavior. So most of us thankfully are wearing seatbelts these days, and man, I was a smoker for way too long. I wish.
Me too.
I wish I smoked for like 15 years and started at age 15. Even before then. You find out who the influential people are. Change their attitudes a bit, or encourage their already positive attitudes towards things. We can make behaviors change, and you have to be narrow in your focus. We're not going to say, oh, our behavior can't be change the world, right, all at once. No, it has to be targeted things. Okay, seatbelts. That's a very specific thing we can go. Okay, don't kill endangered animals in the rainforest. Very specific thing we can say. Don't use, and this happened on the project I worked on in Cameroon. Don't use agricultural chemicals and throw them in the river to kill fish. It'll make you sick.
Yeah.
I've seen these things like where if you're very targeted and you understand specific behaviors and how they work, we can change people hopefully for the better.
Yeah. That
fishing example, man, it's a really cool one. So
that's because I want to touch on this idea of because you just went back to this again, this idea of you mentioned attitude scales, and then you mentioned specifically kind of these village leaders and getting to them. So let's explore that a little bit more.
So let me give you an example of that fishing I was talking about. It's a really good example. It's one of the if I'm going to hang my hat on anything I did very small in a very small place, I would say this is one of the best things that I didn't do it myself. I just empowered people or helped people to express themselves. So we were doing these appraisals of all the communities around this wildlife sanctuary. It's called the 𝕊𝕐𝕒𝕒 Wildlife Sanctuary in Southwest Cameroon. And it was me with a team of 4 other Cameroonians, most of them social scientists or agricultural scientists or conservationists. And you go into the community and you stay and eat with the community for 3 or 4 days, and all the time you're collecting data. So first thing you do is we split the team into, hey, you're going to work with the men, you're going to work with the women. It's a very patriarchal society, and women don't get that much of a voice. But if you split them out from the men, they'll sometimes open up. So we're doing one of these appraisals. We do like these mapping activities. You draw on the ground or on a sheet of paper. Where do you go to fetch your water? Where do you go to get your wildlife? Where do you go to get your timber? So you can spatially kind of figure out what people are doing and where they're going. And as people are doing this, they start telling you stories about the places. So I remember it was actually in the village I did my Peace Corps work, a small village called 𝕊𝕐𝕒𝕒. And when we were doing our PRA there, I worked with the men's group, and the women's group was doing something else, doing their mapping exercise. And then you present them back. When the men present to the women present to the men. The actual community members present their maps back. And the river was very important to the women. And they started talking about issues with the river and things. And then they brought up in front of the entire village, we as the women here do not appreciate people throwing agricultural chemicals, this thing called 𝕊𝕐𝕒𝕒, into the water to poison fish to eat. It's making our children sick. It's depleting our fish. It's doing all kinds of bad things to us. We really would like this to stop. And the men actually heard it then. And the village leaders in this case were men, older men. And traditional law in Cameroon is actually, as long as it doesn't go against government law, traditional law is actual law in Cameroon. So villages can make their own laws as long as it doesn't go against national law. So in the next couple of weeks, they actually met as a village council and then met as a sort of a tribal council. So it's a bunch of villages grouped together in a certain ethnic group. And they passed a local law saying there's no more fishing with 𝕊𝕐𝕒 in the rivers. And that all came about because we actually just listened, right? And empowered these women to stand up and talk with their community so that everyone could kind of understand what was going on. The men, they didn't do much of the cooking. They didn't do much of the child care. They were out, either hunting or working the farms, the cacao, the chocolate farms, that sort of stuff. But just by allowing people to have the voice and understanding a little bit how people work, we were able to, make a little bit of a difference. And it feels good, but then it also, think about the impact of the health and all that on those communities. I hope it seems like we did a pretty positive thing just by listening.
Yeah. That's the idea of fishing with chemicals. That is horrifying to me from an outsider perspective, from an alien anthropology perspective. Like, yeah, of course. Why would you? I can't imagine how many. What do you? Can you think of something like? There's probably a ton of things that Americans have that people in Cameroon would be like, what in the, like, have that same reaction I just did to chemical fishing?
Oh, I don't know. Probably I would imagine some of the things that we eat that are very unusual. Things like, not from Cameroon, but from East Africa. I do my master's in England, and it was a very diverse master's. So some folks from England, it's called the Darwin Institute of Conservation Ecology. And there's people from all over the world, from Central Africa, from India. I was the only guy from the U.S. And I remember, my friend Nashanda? He was from Tanzania. And actually, I got to work in Tanzania later, and he was head of game and fish at the time. But it was his first time out of Tanzania. He was a little bit older than me. I was in my 30s doing my master's. He was maybe 35, 40. And I took him out to buy a computer. He needed a computer. And he's breaking pretty much every British norm out there. So we go into these it's like a Circuit City type thing, a computer shop, a Best Buy. And we're waiting there to go get the computer, and I'm patiently being American/British, waiting patiently to be waited on. And Nash just goes and he starts trying to get the guy to come over, hissing at him, right? And that's done all over the place in Central and East Africa, and it's totally acceptable. So that freaks out the British guy, freaks me out as well. And it's just these little nuances of him learning a little bit of different culture. And I'm sure there are many, many, many times when he, give him something like, I don't know, even basic English pub food would have been very, very unusual for folks. But yeah, we do a lot of weird stuff. I've heard stories about.
You should just bring over like those crazy large jawbreakers that came out like 30 years ago. Like, here's what kids eat. It's a little worse than poison fish.
Yeah, there's tons of weird stuff. I'm sure that wouldn't be that palatable.
Let me ask, in terms of another thing, in terms of these norms. I don't know if this is an area of your study, but you kind of mentioned getting into environmental law. Is that a thing so you kind of dropped the environmental law stuff over time? Okay.
Yeah, completely dropped it. Well, like I said, never even cracked that LSAT book, because back then, in undergrad, I was still. I'm from a very small town. Like I said, I didn't know what I was going to do when I was in college. Like half the other students, I thought I was pre-med, just because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Because make money and become a doctor. Found out very soon that's not what I was interested in. Started taking environmental science classes, and then got this thing in my head. And another friend of mine, who is a pretty well-known environmental lawyer up in Chicago, he actually continued on that path. So he and I did similar degrees. He did his, I think, all in English. He might have taken a few in bio-psych classes, but I decided to double up on it, because that's what I thought. That's where I thought I saw change being effective. Mm-hmm. So I thought, if I was a lawyer, and that's what we do in the States. If the government's not doing what it's supposed to be doing as per our environmental policy, the environmental lawyers go and sue the government. So I was like, well, that's how we affect change. And when I went to Cameroon, I saw the completely opposite side of that, right? We don't have to go top-down approach on every single thing we have. There doesn't have to be a rigid law and a policeman with a stick to change something. Yeah. Right? You can work with local people and build it from the ground up. Like that example of fishing in Cameroon, the government of Cameroon gives the power to the local communities to set their own laws and regulations, as long as they're not, contra to big national laws. And I saw this completely different way life worked, where people could work together and manage, resources together. That's essentially what they're doing. It's a common pool resource. They're managing this fish together. It's there for the whole community. And when the whole community decides, hey, you're doing a bad thing to this, the whole community gets behind it and tries to manage it sustainably, rather than us having to go to the capital of Cameroon, Yaoundé, and be a lawyer and change a law or something. And it's that mindset of me, feeling the power of community and the power of people being able to manage resources on their own was very profound to me. And it's kind of the thing where I was like, well, I don't want to be the stick. I don't want to be the person that's just there telling people what not to do. Why not empower the people to, manage sustainably? So a more positivist attitude, a more positive system.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. There is this other tricky factor kind of related to maybe law a little bit more that is, there's informing people, giving people the knowledge, experience, talking with communities, to create norms. But there are also like large forces that have a vested interest in the status quo, and seatbelts, for example. GM spent a whole lot of money trying to not get anyone to put seatbelts in, because they're like, we've got to start putting seatbelts in. Like they wouldn't even let other makers use it as an option, because they're like, well, then the government's going to come in and want to regulate this. We're going to have to add more things. And they're kind of right in some ways that did happen, but they were good. I'm happy that we have seatbelts and airbags and not decapitating ourselves on dashboards anymore. But there's forces like that. Like I think BP invented the phrase carbon footprint to kind of put the ownership on the individual. Like it's not us, it's you consumers buying from us. That's what the real problem is. And there's just in terms of wildlife trade, I can think of, have you ever heard of parrot fever?
Don't think I have.
It was like the 1940s or something. There was just this period of time when tropical birds like blew up in the United States. There was like
because of hats and things,
I guess, and like maybe global travel was becoming easier with flight and whatever happened, people would be, bringing parrots and things back from South America as gifts. There would be like 500,000 a year. And when you speaking of zoonosis, parrots and some other tropical birds would have some, I'm forgetting the technical name for it, but some parrot fever thing that they lived fine with until you can find them in shipping crates, and they got stressed and shed in confinement, and then they would become symptomatic. They would have diarrhea that would turn into dust that would then, if it flapped around, it would get into humans, and it was pretty deadly. And there's just a lot of motivated reasoning. So when scientists were like, hey, there's this problem with the bird trade and we need to start regulating the bird trade industry and some of the wildlife coming out of this, it was the founding, it was when NIH was originated. The first biohazard suits originated from parrot fever because they were using shoddy labs and stuff. But when they started figuring out what was happening, can you have a guess at who was the most adverse to hearing that birds were causing some deadly disease? You want to take a whack at it?
Pet trade owners? Pet owners?
Yeah, pet owners, bird traders, that sort of thing. And we've seen a lot of this with COVID too, where there's a lot of, I'm a comedian, a lot of, if your business is to pack people indoors, there's like motivation to be like, well, how bad is it really to pack people indoors shoulder to shoulder? And so the point is there's also bigger forces like that, whether it's GM or BP or the bird trade industry or whatever. How do some of those factors factor in? Do they factor in at all to any of the work that you do?
I wouldn't say all that much. And the stuff I'm doing currently, I'm really working on, people looking at changing local level, possibly reaching up to national level conservation laws and things like that. So, these big laws, they are very important. And I'm not, you have to at some point when it comes to some of these things, like you mentioned wildlife trade. So the world had to get together and come up with a convention on international trade and endangered species to try to regulate some of that stuff. But I see more durable solutions and more support for conservation or more support for health when things, are pitched at the local level and people can do something. There's an example, you would have seen this as well. In the 90s, Al Gore came out with his Inconvenient Truth, which was great for the time for awareness raising. But all he did was get on, remember he was on like a cherry picker and he was on there with the curve going up and up and up. And he kept pointing at the curve going up and up and up. And it's an important curve. But then in the movie, I don't remember there really being anything actionable for people to do. Right. So you just completely left them hanging and feeling hopeless. And that's not always the best approach. Okay. Scaring the crap out of people is sometimes, can get some people motivated. But if you keep doing it without telling people or giving people an option to be able to do some conservation action, they get very frustrated. And when it comes to things like climate change, we can change as many light bulbs as we want in our house, but until some of the big things get taken care of, it's not really going to work. So we've got all people behind climate change, but then hopefully that's raised some attitudes and things to get things changed at the bigger picture. But it's hard with some of these big time issues for people to empower people to do something. An example of my research, I just got finished with a U.S. National Parks grant. I've been working with the U.S. National Park Service to look at this thing called white nose syndrome, and what visitors.
In bats?
Yeah, in bats. Yeah. So it's a disease that, probably for your listeners, for a disease that affects bats, a fungal disease. It it's white nose syndrome. It gets all over their bats' faces and turns them all white and things, and it gives them splotchy wings and wakes them up in the winter when they're supposed to be hibernating. I'm way oversimplifying this. My wife is actually a bat biologist, so she'll probably chew me out when I hear this. I've oversimplified it. But so these bats wake up in the winter, and they're not supposed to. They go fly out of the cave. There's nothing there to eat because it's the winter. There's no bugs or anything, and essentially, they die of starvation or just overexertion during that time. So the National Park Service is very interested, of course, in managing their caves, so white nose syndrome doesn't affect them all. It's still moving westward. It's up through Tennessee. It's getting into the Rockies now. There's been some odd cases all the way out in Washington that I think Cavers brought out. But the Park Service really wanted to implement some measures for the park visitors that visitors could accept, right, that would help to mitigate white nose syndrome. So things like closing caves for part of the year.
Can I stop you just for 1 second? Because I think there. You might have said it, but just in case you missed a piece of the puzzle, the white nose syndrome, I believe it's often moved to it becomes invasive in other areas because often like cavers, for example, will get some on their boot and say Europe and then fly and go caving in the Northeast and cave there, and that's how it transfers. So that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's how it got here. So it's a fungus that doesn't really bother bats all that much in Europe, and for our best guess, and it's a pretty darn good guess, is that some cavers from Europe flew over to New York to do some caving in New York, and there's this one spot in New York, there's one cave, and then you can see sort of the rings come out from there. So the bats spread it to one another after it's there, and although it doesn't affect European bats, it affects North American bats very, very badly into that, where I said the sort of the starvation and stuff like that. So once it was here, we think that most of the spread was bats to bats. However, in the last couple of years, there was one weird thing that just popped up in Washington State. White nose syndrome popped up out there. There's no way some bat just flew from Tennessee across the Rockies and ended up in Washington. They just don't do that, right? So that is highly likely that is a caver spreading that around. So that's what the National Park Service is interested in. They didn't want people visiting, say, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky or cavers visiting the Mammoth Cave system up in Kentucky, and then taking that up to North Dakota to Wind Cave or Jewel Cave. So there's a big national white nose group, and they're coming up with all sorts of policies and things on how how to mitigate this, how to slow the spread of white nose, because we're trying to contain it so it doesn't keep moving further and further west. So they've got some strategies and for cave visitors and cavers as well. And some of the strategies they were looking at was partially closing caves, so people couldn't get in them for part of the year, or fully closing caves for a certain amount of time. Another thing that they wanted to do, and they're doing this in many parks, is in Mammoth Cave and now in Carlsbad Caverns as well. They're having even just the regular everyday visitor walk across a decontamination mat, right? So you walk across the decontamination mat, you're either at the beginning or the end or both of the cave.
Like you wash your boat before you go into another
exactly. So you're not spreading
water system.
Mussels around. So you're not spreading fungal spores on your shoes. It's because a lot of times people, and I did this as a kid, we took road trips, right? And we would go with my family and we go from one national park to the next. And you don't want to be contributing to the chain of that spread with stuff on your shoes. So they're looking at cave closures, decon mats, and then for cavers, having like dedicated gear for a certain region. So white nose is here, so it's okay to use that gear here. But if you're a caver and you go out to say lava beds caves in California and Oregon, that you don't take that stuff with you. So you have a different set of gear. So what we were doing in our research, and I had a student, this was probably the most amazing project. She got to go to all the big, they call them show caves in the National Park Service. That's like Carlsbad and Mammoth and all these really cool sites. Yeah. She's now at University of Georgia doing she's now a full scientist in another lab at University of Georgia, which is awesome.
She just likes caving though, right? Like both of you guys are just scam artists that are using science funding to travel the world and do awesome things, right?
Hey man, the government's entrusted with protecting our public land, so someone's got to figure it out.
Caving's awesome.
What we found in there, so we're studying people's, we thought, what the Park Service was worried about throwing, because in the past they close stuff off, you get the squeaky wheels that get all bent out of shape, and the Park Service is there not only to serve the wildlife, but then also to provide recreation opportunities for people. That's part of the Organic Act. That's what national parks are for. So they have this weird balance where they got to try to balance both of these, the recreation with the conservation of resources. And they were genuinely interested. How do we get, what would be acceptable for people going to visit these caves? And we just asked them. Hannah set up a table in front of the visitor center at all these different national parks, and people would come by and take surveys on iPads. And our research on that is just starting to come out now. And this is it's a park visitor, so they're there probably a conservation-minded individual to go to a national park in the first place. But we found, that people actually were fairly accepting of all of these different techniques, as long as there were no big barriers to it. Like, if you're going to say you need to change clothes before going in a certain cave or doing something like that, the Park Service may have to provide different types of clothes or some sort of coverings for shoes or something along those lines. But the Park Service was reassured, and then also to expand these preventative measures for white nose, that the public wouldn't raise a stink, and the public actually was interested in doing this. But one thing we found out, getting back to this whole small gains, concrete things people could do, Hannah was frequently asked after the survey, people would say to her, well, what can I do to help bats? How can I do this in my own house to help bats? And unfortunately with white nose, there's not too much an individual can do. I mean, you can put up some bat boxes in your yard to provide some more habitat, but really this is a disease that's spreading. So following the rules in the National Park Service is probably the best thing you can do, but it's very frustrating to people, even going back to that inconvenient truth, when they can't actually, they learn about something and they want to help, and then they can't. And it's a really, really hard thing that we do. We really, it's one thing to gloom and doom all the issues, but if you can't give people actionable things, it's really, really frustrating to individuals and can end up having backlash on you at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to, given the time and space and energy, some people, just certain issues aren't going to matter to some, life is full of a zillion things to think about, but everyone at the end of the day likes the idea of making the quote unquote correct choices in life, but that's still, the key word is choice and choosing. People definitely have an aversion to being told what to do. And I mean, COVID's really highlighted this with things like, you know, all of the sensible arguments that, and you just mentioned how important it is to, you know, see people in person and everything like that. And all of those arguments made early on of like, oh, we can't do all of these things because this will be a mental health issue and everything. And although I agree with all of that, in some regards, I also think that aspects of it were just people not wanting to be, if it were instead the case that we're like, hey, we look at what these bat populations are doing to live with viruses, and they pack close to one another and keep their body temperature up. So we'll do that. We'll keep our body temperature up. We need to be around one another all the time. We'll like be at live music, indoors, dancing with one another, and inside at gyms and packed. You just got to be packed around everyone all the time. People would be like, I need my alone time. This is a mental health issue. I can't just be around people all of the time. And it's because a big aspect of it is just not being told what to do. And I think that's why I believe this is such an important conversation that we're having, enlightening for me, because I think policy is a tricky issue of when you mention the top down stuff, but you also mention, you know, empowering women to influence some of these elders too. Well, that is still policy change at the end of the day. You know, I think that the most libertarian person in the world would at the end of the day still likes good policy that is effective and works and benefits them and everybody else. It's just sometimes how it's presented.
How it's presented and who the message comes from as well. So we asked about, you know, people's attitudes towards bats and if they're comfortable walking across the mats and all that stuff. But then we had a whole nother section of once again, norms. So who's the best person to send that message? Because people want to know why they're having to walk across these mats. People really want to know why they can't go into the cave at a certain time. I've driven all the way here. Now I can't go in the cave because you've closed it for some reason. But we actually asked questions about which two groups of people that more that message should come from, and you know, people like park rangers were ranked highly, and then friends and family, and you know, people were, if you know where and who to send a trustworthy message through, that's great, and if that person is trusted, people accept that message. I think with COVID, the problem we have is that we had people respected, but they weren't given the right message, right? So they're giving out a bunch of, you know, just a bunch of BS about what's going on. And that's the social psychology model still works, right, man? Because they're asking, like, they're getting their message from a trusted source, but the message is off. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how it could have been done different. It hit us so quick. I know we've been talking about pandemics, or I have, ever since I've been studying this stuff forever. We knew something was coming eventually. But it got so politicized so fast, and people are giving out all these conflicting messages that it just confused the general public. It's hard, and it continues today. It's just getting I trust this person, so I'm going to listen to everything they say, no matter if it's completely just cooked up in a newsroom.
I mean, if you were to ask me what we could reasonably expect and do different. I mean, one, I did not, I thought we had a really incompetent president that made it all about him at the worst possible time. But still, if you were to ask me, that's just my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, next pandemic, what are we gonna do? What's a list of, put me in charge of epidemiology. What's the checklist of things that we do when there's maybe a threat on the horizon? There's word that some virus is breaking through to human populations, 20 years from now. What can we learn from this one that we would do differently next time? And I'm like, I don't really know.
I'll tell you where I come from. So I come from the preventative. You stop this stuff before it happens. We've known forever we know where zoonoses come from.
Yeah.
They come mostly from wildlife, like 70+% come from wildlife. We know that people are encroaching on areas they haven't been in before. We know that people are eating and touching and whatever with animals that can transmit zoonoses. We know there are active wet markets all over Southeast Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. We know all this stuff. So we put the amount of effort we've had to put into making vaccines, the amount of money we've had to put into making vaccines and educating the public and locking everything down, the amount of money we lost that way. If we had invested a fraction of that in preventative measures where these diseases emerge from, I think we'd be in a much better place. It's so hard for me to get money to go and study these sorts of things. I was studying this in Marcy, one of your previous guests, in East Africa, in Uganda. And there is a community, the people that live north of Murchison Falls National Park. They do some hunting. They don't traditionally like to eat baboons, and they definitely don't like to eat bats. So we thought, it seems like this would be a fairly reasonable place where people could maybe be a little bit culturally immune to some of these big bad crossover things, because things cross over most of the time from rodents,
bats, primates, birds.
And so we're like, okay, these guys aren't eating primates, don't want to eat primates, don't want to eat bats. So why is this like an Ebola outbreak area? Well, people are going out into the forest further and further to find more food, and the population is growing. But in addition to this, so something really, we found out something fairly unusual. So I was having a community meeting in a community north of Murchison Falls with hunters and whatnot to try to determine some good research questions. Marcy and I wanted to do some research on bushmeat and zoonoses, so bushmeat, hunted game in Africa, and zoonoses. So we were asking about, hey, do you guys eat bats? Do you guys eat baboons? And everyone's like, no, we're from this area. We do not eat those things. It's not in our culture to. And finally, at one point, one of the hunters stood up, and a brave young guy. He's like, hey, you may not want to eat, you may not think you're eating primates, but you actually may be. So what's happening in this area north of Murchison Falls in Uganda is that baboons, they're big animals, man, and they destroy crops. So hunting's totally illegal in Uganda. People do it anyway, but the only thing you can legally hunt are things that destroy crops. So we're talking about primates and bush pigs. So you can get those guys if they're damaging your crops. Mm-hmm. And so this hunter said, well, we're allowed to kill these baboons, and they're big animals with big bits of muscle. And you can butcher that in a way that it looks like anything else, right? So if meat is meat, if it's big enough, it could. Who knows if that's a piece of a baboon or a piece of a hippo, which is relatively safe. So we started asking around. We're like, oh my gosh, is this really happening? Is there this deception in the market between the hunter and the buyer and the consumer? And we went back years later, and I went and interviewed a bunch of hunters around the park to see what they thought about this deception. And then I followed up my PhD student. She interviewed women and cooks about this issue, see if they thought about deception. And the hunters and the dealers are saying, yeah, we're doing this all the time. We're selling the meat as to sell the meat. And the women are like, no, this never happens. So this is complete disparity here where people should be largely culturally immune from some of these crossover events because they don't want to eat bats and they don't want to eat primates, but they're getting tricked into eating them. So it's kind of a neat thing we had come out earlier this year. It's like, oh my God, this is nuts. So if we would invest more time, money, and effort into, the places where these zoonoses spill over and occur and address the real problems of growing populations and having to clear more land for agriculture and having to kill more wildlife to eat, we're never going to see we will see zoonoses emerge, of course, but hopefully we won't see them as often. And unfortunately, we like to react as a society. We like to say, oh no, we're going to wait till the something bad happens, until the big fire happens, then we'll do something about it.
Well, it's super hard. I mean, that's the thing because all of that sounds good. Like, preventative care. Yes, it's so much cheaper than preventative everything. The preventative maintenance on your car is I just had to make a choice of I had a flat tire and I have all-wheel drive, and so it was either just replace the one tire and risk screwing up my drivetrain, or bite the bullet and buy all four. I replaced all four tires, but it was a difficult decision to make. It was a financial, it was a bigger financial hit than only replacing one tire. And that's just so much of no one, and not just the cost of things, but no one is ever going to be celebrated for the pandemics that didn't happen. You know, like no one's ever going to be grateful. We're not going to have a holiday each year to be like, we didn't have a new pandemic this year. Hooray. And I don't know what that holiday, hope that holiday would be like, very sterile and everything else, I imagine. But, you know, it's like, yeah, you can get accolades by some people anyway for discovering a vaccine that helps fix a problem that already exists, and you can have someone that, but then you have people that don't want to get the vaccine, this preventative thing, until they're in the ICU, and then they're like, I'm ready for the vaccine, and have to find that out, how vaccines work, the hard way. And it's just like how it's just not very salient when the problem never arises. It's just hard to be grateful for it. It's hard to really appreciate.
With zoonoses, though, they do arise, right? So you get small outbreaks that die off. So this area we're working with in north of Murchison Falls Park in Uganda, they've had Marburg outbreaks, they've had Ebola outbreaks, but they've been very small and localized. And these are hemorrhagic fevers. It's a very high fatality. Thankfully, COVID didn't have as high a fatality, although it probably would have burned out faster if it had a high fatality.
Yeah.
But that's a side point. That's for some of your biologists and virologists to talk about. For example, in these communities, so they've had these smaller outbreaks of Ebola, and we asked people about what they thought about diseases, what diseases come from which types of wildlife, and that sort of thing. And the people were very aware that diseases cross over from wildlife. They were all aware of Marburg. They were all aware of Ebola, and they correctly identified and grouped them into one. We did this with statistics. Grouped them into one category, and they put rodents, primates, and bats into one category as opposed to all other wildlife. They knew where these things were coming from, where the diseases emerged from. And the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Wildlife didn't put that much money into education campaigns on radio and in local communities to talk about these things, but they put enough into where people were well aware and did not want to consume these animals, and the deception was what was getting them. But, you know, a little bit can go a long way, especially in countries with much lower economies than us. And people will listen and change their behaviors. Like these communities, they knew where the diseases could potentially come from, and they didn't want to eat them. So, I mean, we spend some targeted preventative stuff, and it can go a pretty long way.
The hunting and fishing situation that it seems like such a tricky one. Like you know, it's in the same way that quitting smoking is very difficult, as you and I both know. But I've never had an eating disorder, but that sounds more difficult to me because you need to eat. You cannot quit eating cold turkey, and so you need to have a relationship with food. In the same issue with bushmeat and zoonosis and in hunting and fishing, and how to regulate things and what's too much. And there's going to be some cheaters and poachers, and maybe there's going to be policy that's bad too, and too restrictive. And how do you go about, first off, can I ask you a lighter question before we get into that that's related? I'm very interested in what's like good bush meat that you enjoy? Like what are some of your meals that you really, because I like trying, like it's hard to find something that like I'm thrilled about. Like kangaroo, I wasn't a fan of. Like shark, I thought was gross. But I'll always try a new thing, but very rarely do I find something that I'm like, ooh, that venison stromboli.
I no longer eat meat. I'm pescatarian these days, so I only eat fish and beans and stuff because the meat in general is just it's an environmental train wreck on what it costs environmentally for us to produce cows and that sort of stuff. Chickens are okay, and fish are pretty sustainable.
Just the feces alone that
yes,
goes into the land and waterways and everything else.
So when I was in Cameroon, I basically had two rules on what I would not eat. I'm pretty open to eating anything, but me coming from growing up sort of in a conservationist in the U.S., my family was very outdoorsy, and we were very much had a conservation ethic. Is when I got to Cameroon, I was like, well, I'm not gonna. I know that the community I'm getting posted to, the primary source of protein is meat, and it's hunted meat. So I was like, well, I have two rules for myself. I'm not going to eat anything endangered, and I'm not going to eat primates. It's just too weird, man. I did see and for me, it's to see something that looks human-like in a stew pot is disconcerting to me. And it's just other people's cultures and that. So I have those two rules. But at the time, my favorite meat in Cameroon, and it was not endangered at the time, was a pangolin. A pangolin is a scaly anteater. And it is absolutely delicious, man. It's probably the best thing I've ever eaten. It's like fine pork. But at the time, this was not endangered. All right, shortly after that, in recent times, all the pangolins have become endangered. Even all the sub-Saharan tree pangolins and ground pangolins have become endangered, largely due to the meat and meat and medicine trade, to Southeast Asia. So it got in someone's mind, okay, the scales of this scaly anteater, they're like wiener potency, these sorts of things to, make people virile. And then after I was in Cameroon, those scales started getting exported to markets in Southeast Asia and Asia, and the animal numbers plummeted, these pangolins, and they got on the endangered species list. But I always say the pangolins got 3 strikes about it to my class. I show pictures of this because I give examples about endangered species management and global endangered species management. And the pangolin's a good thing. So pangolin is delicious for its detriment. Now its scales are used as medicine. And the third thing, it is easy as all get out to catch. It just is in a tree, you hit it with a stick, it rolls up. So it rolls up not like an armadillo, but like a roly-poly or something, and you just carry it. Yeah. So that guy, unfortunately, all those pangolins got 3 strikes against him. And I'm not surprised they're on the endangered species list, but man, they are tasty. I'd never eat one again. But
I don't know why pangolin is like ringing a bell for me. I don't know if are they a sort. Was there some zoonosis issue with pangolins at some point? Or maybe they might just have weird genitals. I don't know. I do so many of these shows. There's like the weird facts that I know about things get confused in my mind. But
I'm sure they carry something. But for some reason, that diet of only like termites and ants just turns in this delicious.
Interesting. So
that's probably the best thing I've that was a delicacy, and a delicacy in the community as well.
This is the other thing that I wanted to ask you. Again, not your research, just a personal adventure question. As someone that's traveled a lot, I like trying a lot of different local cuisine and stuff, but I also, eat in restaurants. So I'll go to high-end things and have a menu and pick the thing. But I've done some episodes about satiation and eating and why our taste preferences are the way that they are. What is it like not having a choice in what you eat? I guess we've all been children and just eat what our parents. But what is it like being well, here's what's on the menu. This is what got hunted today. Here's this is what got gathered. Whatever. This is what we're eating. You have no choice. Did it make the experience of eating more pleasurable or less?
Well, I would say it relates a little bit back to community. So these were very low-income families I'm working with. And yes, people go out and hunt, but they did sell a lot of the meat. So the meat and a cartridge costs money. So it did cost a lot, whether that's manpower or the actual equipment to go and find meat. And if I was ever served domestic meat, that's where it actually became more of a sort of a cultural thing. When I was ever served domestic meat, they had to specifically go out and get a chicken or kill a chicken that maybe they would have kept for eggs or kept for a rainy day when someone got sick and sell it. So if a farmer had me by and had bush meat, we'd all sit together and eat our meals together. Whatever the meat was whatever came up, but all the other food was pretty much the same. So everyone ate this big thing of starch, a little bit of green vegetables, and then some sort of meat stew, and that was our staple in the area. So the meals didn't really change all that much. Occasionally you get different things. So I just got used to eating those, but the trickier thing became, and the U.S. Peace Corps is actually really good with their cultural training and things to be sensitive of people and what it costs to make food, especially special food. So occasionally farmers, after I'd do a farm visit and maybe do some tree planting with them, they'd have me back to the house, and they'd kill a chicken or something along those lines. And I knew that this was kind of a big deal. It doesn't happen very often. They kill a chicken. Usually you just need a small piece of bush meat or dried fish or whatever's on the menu. But part of that chicken, part of the most treasured, or what the Cameroonians thought where I was the best part of the chicken was the gizzard. Mm. And I don't like organs.
No.
At all. I've tried everything. I've tried liver over and over again, and it's the texture and sort of the grain. And but I always got the gizzard. So I had a strategy. Either I would eat it, but I don't want to eat it because I have a very expressive face, and I don't want to be pulling a face because everyone knows when you don't like to eat something, you do that. But if I was able to, I came up with a strategy. So there usually is a grandma or a grandpa there, and I always say, no, this is, you are I may be the respected guest, but it's your privilege and right to have this. And usually they take it. And then, sometimes laughter is always, it's a universal thing. So I could make some joke about me having a weak stomach or something like that and get around it. But yeah,
very nutrient rich, those organs. That you would think that's what the lion makes the kill. It goes for those organs first and foremost. Yeah. But yeah, that's it's. I can't stand liver or whatever either. That's an interest. What was another? Again, not your research, but I just think, doing something like joining the Peace Corps sounds like such a cool thing to do. I had a high school friend that did it as well, and maybe if we have some younger listeners, we'll inspire them to think about maybe doing something like this and traveling abroad. What was I would like to know what your favorite place that you've kind of been in terms of research, and then what were some of the hardest, like that was a very good example, but what were some of the hardest things to get used to?
Sure. Yeah. So that my favorite place in the world is it's always been Tanzania. And this is a thing from an early childhood experience. Like I said, I grew up in a very rural community in Scottsville, Virginia, and we used to go to the library to watch movies. And I watched a documentary on the Serengeti and the wildebeest migration and all that, and just fell in love, was over the moon, never thought I'd be able to get to see that. So I was posted in Africa, to Cameroon, which is West Africa. Tanzania is on the other side of the continent in East Africa. And my parents really wanted to come over and visit me in Cameroon to see some sights, see some wildlife, whatnot. But I actually suggested, hey, I've always wanted to go to Tanzania. Why don't you guys meet me in Tanzania? And we went to Tanzania, had the atypical, just brilliant safari, went down to Ngorongoro Crater, saw cheetahs and lions and elephants and everything. And we're camping out there. There's bush pigs running around the camp at night, just having this wonderful, wonderful Tanzania experience. And I was like, well, gosh, I'd love to come back here someday. But in the conservation world, everyone wants to go work in Tanzania, and everyone wants to go and have the job in Serengeti or wherever. But funny enough, so after I finished my master's and got married, my wife and I actually applied for jobs in Tanzania with the Frankfurt Zoological Society, and we got them. And we're actually able to live and work in Mahali Mountains National Park, which is in very far western Tanzania. But the headquarters for our NGO was in Serenera, which is in the middle of the Serengeti National Park. So whenever the boss would call up and want a meeting, we were there in a heartbeat. And it was oh my God, that job in Tanzania was, my wife and I, some of our favorite memories. And probably, that is definitely some of the more incredible things that I've done in my favorite places in the world. When it comes to difficulty, oh my gosh, what did we do one time? So because I was working after I finished my Peace Corps work, I was working with WCS in that sanctuary, and the government of Cameroon was looking at putting some new parks in the country. So, but they really wanted to get a better handle on some of the natural resource use, which included bushmeat hunting. So me and my counterpart who did this hunting study with me in Southwest Cameroon, they asked us to go to Central Cameroon and get into this national park and interview hunters and see what kind of bushmeat was coming out. And he and I got into a literal dugout canoe, okay, from a tree. And it's just a dugout tree trunk, and you're sitting in it with one guy in the back, one guy in the front, pulling it up this very, very dangerous river. For 2 days, I sat on my waterproof camera box going up this river to try to get to this park, stopping every once in a while at random hunting camps, which are fine. The hunters were always great and fun to talk to because I could speak some local languages and whatnot. But that was very trying. And we're going sometimes close to the edge. There's lots of venomous snakes that could maybe drop in from the trees, and thankfully it didn't happen to us into the dugout canoe. But I would say with me and David 𝕊𝕐𝕗, we did our 3 or 4 day expedition up into this new national park they were looking at putting at gazetting or making it official. That was probably my most trying adventure was going up that river for 2 days in a dugout canoe, and they are not stable. You think of just a regular like old town canoe is tippy. You got to sit perfectly still in these dugouts, or you're going A over T, as the Brits would say, as my wife would say, into the river. And thankfully, we did not tip that canoe on the way up.
Wow. Yeah, there's this great documentary. I think it's called Happy People, and it's just about this dude that lives in like Siberia or something by himself, and it's just like him and a dog and an axe, and he's just this. Like his life is just insane, and just living each day. And there was a scene, and he just like takes an axe, cuts down a tree, carves it out with the axe by himself, and then just starts using the axe to paddle up this tree and stuff. And like, wow,
it's not safe, those canoes, man. That was an adventure, but man, I was breaks my life a few times on that one.
Yeah. Oh. It sounds fun. I love a good adventure. But yeah, that's intense. All right. So as we start wrapping up, a couple things. One, if you want to mention anything else about bushmeat, but I was kind of curious about if in these areas what kind of the human expansion, the influence of human expansion and biodiversity loss is having in regions like that, some of the impacts.
Yeah, that's the trouble is we
many people.
So many people, and then it's increasing. So sub-Saharan Africa and Asia is starting to plateau a bit, but projections for sub-Saharan Africa still show the most rapid population growth on the planet. And that will eventually slow, but we're yet to plateau. So all those people got to eat. Okay, so people have to eat, and that is the biggest. A lot of folks when I say it in class, I talk about biodiversity loss and what are the drivers of biodiversity loss, and students they'll go to like urbanization and this and that's a little bit, but no, it takes so much land to put food in our mouths. Mm-hmm. That is still, and it's always been the number one issue with biodiversity loss. So, where I was going with that, but
so yeah, just figuring out how to manage, because we're also going to talk about food insecurity as well, which is related.
That is our biggest challenge. Is I think is feeding the world and then the resulting biodiversity loss. So, our agricultural expansion, we need to get that under control, and we need to be more efficient and effective at the agriculture we do. There's a lot of inefficient agriculture all over the world, so we need to do something about this because the projected population growth it's just as scary when Population Bomb was written, whatever it was, back in the 60s or 70s. So we really need to get a handle on this. And when it comes to bushmeat and biodiversity loss, one thing I've learned is I was dependent on bushmeat, on hunted game for my personal life. That was the protein I was available to me, and that's what I needed to get by. So I just, it's hard for me sometimes when I talk about it in the States or talk about it to Western audiences. Why don't they just do what we did? Put rules on people and make them stop hunting. I'm like, no, guys, people got to eat. What else are they going to eat? That's what's there. So just to go around and tell people, no, don't do this, don't hunt. You're killing the biodiversity that I saw on planet Earth. That's not a solution, and it's the easy one that all of us go to. And it's the same thing you see on, you see social media. People get really bent out of shape about trophy hunting, but they don't understand the issues. People get really bent out of shape about seeing these small animals being eaten. But there are people that have a very much of a way lower income than you do, and are quite hungry because they have to work their butts off, not sit in a chair all day. For you to sit on social media and tell people what to do, that this simple solution exists, it doesn't. And it's a hard thing to come across. It's a hard reality of how the world is. But we just need to get better at how we feed people, because that's going to continue to be the number one reason why we're intruding into areas and worrying about zoonosis crossovers from wildlife, but then also just cutting down forest and affecting climate from deforestation.
Do these cultures eat insects at all?
Oh yeah, some do. That's one of my favorite times is insects, man. Termite day in my village in Cameroon. That was one of the best days. So the termites will all emerge at one time, and they'll fly out, go into a new colony. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. You have to have an entomologist on to figure out what they're doing. I've had many on in the past, and some of them are evangelical about, like, this is what we need to do for food security and stuff. We need to be eating more insects globally. I tell you, man, that was a festival when it came to the termite hatch day. That was it was a party. Everyone put up some sort of, we didn't have electricity, but everyone put up either a battery or a gas powered lamp next to your house, like under your eaves, and you have a white sheet behind it that would go into a bucket. Right, and the termites would get attracted to that sheet, and you get buckets and buckets of termites. And a lot of times, as they hit the sheet, the wings would pop off, so you didn't have the wing issue all that much, or there were quite a few wings. And then we just had a party, stay up all night frying termites and eating them up. They were delicious. Now, other things, I don't know. It's not palatable for a lot of people to think about cricket meal and all that. It's a great protein source. I don't know if that could ever be large scale and acceptable by a good part of the population. I can't eat a lot of insects. I'm a texture guy. I've tried palm grubs, which are these they're big grubby looking things, and they've been fried up on sticks when I was in Cameroon. I tried one. It's a texture thing. It's not good to have that, for me, to have that pop of food in your mouth.
I think it's going to be like insect protein powder, power bars, that sort of thing. I think that's how you get them into people.
So I mean, some of them are fun, and like the termites, fried up termites with some chili on them. That's delicious, man. Anyone close their eyes and think they're eating popcorn or just any sort of salty snack. But when you start getting into those gooey ones, if you're going to eat them as critters, that's hard to do. My wife ate part of tarantulas in Cambodia when she was there, and was not really into it very much. I don't think I was able to do that either.
I've eaten some insects. They weren't prepared very well, but some were okay. But yeah, I would be curious in exploring it more. But yeah, I was just curious if that was a part of the culture there.
It is. With those, it was, people would eat palm grubs, so they actively seek them out and then pull them out of palm trees and get the palm grubs. But it wasn't that widespread. It was more of a snacky type thing. But yeah, so the termite emergence was great.
Yeah.
That was always a big festival of the community. But yeah, aside from that, there was not much insect eating. Really don't know why. Just either they weren't available or wasn't in the culture to eat them.
Just curious.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, was there anything else that you wanted to cover, or did we have any loose ends? I feel like we solved most of the world's problems in 90 minutes. But if there was any other of your research that you wanted to explore, or if you just wanted to direct people toward any other resources, or you can just do none of those things, and I can thank you for being here and we can wrap up. But
Yeah, well, no, I want to, thank you for having me on. It's just if I want to say anything to your listeners, just take the time. Let's get out of this COVID thing where we're like you said at the beginning, shouting each other on Twitter or behind our closed doors or whatever. When it's safe and in a good way, let's get back out and start having a little bit more of this human interaction and looking into each other's eyes and having meaningful conversations with each other. Turn off the TV for a while, get away from the screen. As Ron Swanson once said, get outside and stand in nature. It's one of the best things you can do for yourself. And there's nature all around you. There's nature in big urban areas. There's nature in rural areas. There's nature everywhere. You can find it. It's very restorative, and it also builds this ethic in us that this is our planet. We share this one planet. We've got one shot, and we need to feed people sustainably, but then we also need to conserve it. So go out and enjoy some of it and get an appreciation for it. And please, do the right thing. Do the little bit that you can, whether that's changing your light bulb or supporting a certain cause, donating money somewhere, taking a kid out fishing, any of that. Just do what you can. Just be a good citizen. We can get back to where we were. We were shut up, closed behind doors, and it affected me badly. I had bad mental health issues being in quarantine. It was really difficult to teach students over Zoom. It's really difficult to sit there in our individual boxes on TV. So get back out there when it's safe. But you can always reconnect with nature, even right now. Seeing an explosion in our outdoor activities, and just enjoy this planet. We're all in it together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a perfectly stable individual, so I can't really relate. But yeah, other than that, good. I'm completely insane. That is, yeah, it's that's an important message. I hope that I do. I was talking about. I mentioned. Having a holiday to celebrate the pandemics that we didn't have in a given year or whatever. Mm-hmm. But maybe there will be environmental and One Health-ish kind of festivals and things like that coming together locally and in places, and ways of making kind of the sharing of information and creating better policies and raising awareness in fun ways where we're meeting in person more and that sort of thing in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, man. Earth Day is still one of the biggest global events that gathered people together. The original Earth Day. It's been surpassed by the Black Lives Matter movement, but one of our biggest gatherings of people in the history of the West was based around Earth Day. And we were just, the Earth got into a bad place. There was a lot of pollution going on, but a lot of people got together, got behind it, and then signed in, a lot of them by Nixon himself, bipartisan, passed all this great legislation we've tried to use to conserve our planet. So maybe we can get back there one day. That'll be really nice to.
All right. Well, thanks for all the work that you do, Adam Willcox. And yeah, I'll have to talk with I'll have to have your wife on here sometime.
She does a lot of white nose, and she knows a lot more about that than me. So.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I love a good bat conversation. Well, it was wonderful talking to you, and thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you more next week.